I still remember my father's words echoing in my head that night. "You'll never make it on your own, Daniel. You're a disappointment." He said it so calmly, so confidently, as if my failure was already written in stone. And maybe for a while I believed him. But life has a strange way of turning pain into power. Because years later, I walked back into that same house, not as the broken son they threw away, but as the man they never saw coming. Growing up, I wasn't born into love. I was born into expectations. My father, Richard, was a respected businessman. My mother, Claire, carried herself like she came from royalty. And me, I was the constant reminder that perfection didn't run in the family. Every dinner felt like a silent report card. Grades, achievements, college plans, everything was a performance. And no matter what I did, it was never enough. I still remember being 16, proudly showing my father a small app I built for school. It helped local shops track their inventory. He looked at it for 5 seconds, then said, "Maybe focus on something useful next time." That one sentence, those 6 words, shattered me. I started to believe that maybe he was right, that maybe I wasn't meant for more. After high school, I refused to follow his path into corporate finance. I wanted to build something of my own, something real. So I told him I wasn't going to college. The silence that followed felt like the world stopped. Then came the storm. "You're throwing away your future for a fantasy?" he shouted. "Do you think you're smarter than me? Look around you, Daniel. You have nothing." My mother didn't say much. She just turned away, eyes full of embarrassment, like she couldn't even stand to be associated with me. That was the last night I slept in that house. He threw me out with nothing but a backpack, a cheap laptop, and $300 in my pocket. And as the door closed behind me, I heard his voice one last time. "Don't come back until you've proven you're worth something." For months, I slept in tiny, rented rooms, sometimes on couches of people I barely knew. I worked at a diner during the day, coded small freelance projects at night. The world didn't owe me anything, and I learned that fast. There were nights I stared at my cracked laptop screen, wondering if it was all pointless. But every time I thought about quitting, I heard my father's voice again, that smug, certain tone, and it lit something inside me. I didn't want to prove him wrong out of hate. I wanted to prove myself right. So I kept going, one project after another, one sleepless night after another, until one day, something changed. A small app I built to help online sellers manage orders started gaining traction. At first, it was just a few hundred downloads, then thousands. Then investors started calling. Within a year, I had a small team. Within 3, I had a company. And by the 5th year, that failure of a son had built a tech startup valued at over $20 million. But that wasn't the victory. No, the victory was still waiting. Back home. The day I decided to go back, it wasn't about showing off. It was about closure. About looking the people who broke me straight in the eyes and letting them see what they lost. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 6 years. Not a call, not a message, nothing. But when I heard through an old neighbor that my father's business had collapsed, that he'd lost almost everything, I knew fate had a twisted sense of irony. So I made a decision. I'd return. Not as the boy they threw out, but as the man they underestimated. When I parked outside the same house that once threw me away, I smiled, because this time I wasn't knocking to ask for approval. I was knocking to change everything. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt heavier than I remembered. The same old oak tree stood at the corner of the driveway, but the house looked smaller now. Or maybe I had just grown. The windows were dark, the paint was peeling, and for the first time, I realized something. This wasn't the home I had lost. It was the cage I had escaped. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door. My heart was pounding, not out of fear, but anticipation. I wasn't that 19-year-old kid anymore, begging for approval. I was a man who had built everything they said I couldn't. When the door opened, my mother stood there. For a moment she didn't recognize me. Her eyes widened and her hand went to her mouth. "Daniel?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. "It's been a while." She looked older, more fragile. Her confidence, that cold, sharp look she used to wear, was gone. She hesitated, as if unsure whether to hug me or shut the door. Before she could decide, a familiar voice came from behind her. "Who is it?" And then he appeared. My father. He looked different. His once pressed suit was replaced by an old sweater, his hair was graying, and his eyes carried a tiredness I'd never seen before. For the first time, I saw him not as a giant, but as a man who'd fallen. When he saw me, he froze. No hello, no welcome, just silence. "You look surprised," I said, forcing a faint smile. He crossed his arms, trying to hold on to whatever authority he thought he still had. "I didn't think you'd ever come back," he said coldly. "I didn't think so either," I replied. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Just the faint ticking of a wall clock behind him, the same one that used to mark every awkward family dinner. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "Daniel, come in, please." I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me, like it remembered every argument that had ever happened here. The smell of old wood and stale air hit me. Memories flooded back. The nights I stayed up crying after another lecture. The mornings I left for school pretending everything was fine. My father sat down on the old couch, his eyes still scanning me like I was some kind of stranger. "So," he said flatly, "what brings you here? Need money?" I almost laughed. The irony was bitter and sweet at the same time. "No," I said, calm and steady. "I came to see how you're doing." He scoffed. "How thoughtful." I looked around the house. The walls had cracks, the shelves were half empty, and the family portraits had gathered dust. The empire he was so proud of had clearly crumbled. "I heard about the business," I said quietly. "I'm sorry things didn't go the way you planned." He clenched his jaw. "You don't get to pity me, Daniel. You wouldn't understand what it means to lose everything." I leaned forward slightly. "Actually, I do." That hit him. I saw it in his eyes, the realization, the flicker of shame, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. "So what are you doing now? Still chasing your little computer dreams?" I smiled. "Something like that." My mother looked between us nervously. "Your father doesn't mean to sound harsh," she said. "We've just been going through a lot." "It's okay, Mom," I said gently. "I understand." Then I pulled out my phone and opened a photo. My company building, the team, the office I'd built from scratch. I placed the phone on the table between us. "That's what I've been working on," I said. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" "My company," I said. "We develop software for logistics and supply management. We're expanding internationally next quarter." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then he looked up at me, speechless. "You're the owner?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "The same boy you said would never make it." He sat back, his face pale. My mother's eyes filled with tears, not just of pride, but regret. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt free. For years I thought revenge would mean rubbing my success in their faces. But sitting there, seeing their shock and guilt, I realized something deeper. I didn't need revenge. I had already won. Still, part of me wanted to say the words I'd waited years to say. So I looked straight at my father and whispered, "I proved my worth. Not to you, but to myself." He didn't respond. He just stared, lost in thoughts of everything he'd said, everything he'd broken. I stood up. "I didn't come here for validation. I came here to say goodbye to the version of me you tried to destroy." As I turned to leave, my mother grabbed my hand, tears running down her face. "Daniel, can we see you again? Please?" I smiled sadly. "Maybe one day, Mom, when it doesn't hurt anymore." I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I had in years. The air outside felt cleaner, the world wider. But little did I know, my story with them wasn't over yet, because a week later, my father called, and what he said next changed everything. My phone rang that morning. I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar, but my gut told me it was a call from the past, one I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. Still, something in me said I should pick up. "Daniel?" My father's voice came through, quieter than I'd ever heard it. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It had been years since he'd said my name without anger behind it. "I didn't think I'd hear from you so soon," I said carefully. "I need to talk to you," he replied, his tone strained. "In person." I paused. "About what?" There was a long silence, then he sighed. "About everything." I could hear the weight in his voice, the sound of a man who'd finally realized he wasn't in control anymore. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him later that afternoon. When I arrived at the small cafe downtown, he was already there. No suit, no expensive watch, just an old man nursing a black coffee. For the first time in my life, he looked human. He stood when I approached, but didn't say a word. We sat across from each other, the silence thick and awkward. Finally, he spoke. "You've done well for yourself." "I did what I had to," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He nodded slowly. "I heard about your company. People talk." "Yeah, it's been a long road." He stared into his cup for a while before whispering, "I lost everything, Daniel. The company, the house, most of our savings. I thought I could rebuild it, but—" His voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. I studied him, unsure how to feel. This was the man who once told me I was worthless, now confessing defeat. "I'm sorry that happened," I said softly. He looked up, eyes red and tired. "You know, when I threw you out, I thought I was teaching you discipline. I thought I was making you strong." "You did," I said. "But not in the way you think." His lip trembled slightly. "I made mistakes. I see that now. I pushed you away because I was afraid you'd fail, and maybe afraid you'd prove you didn't need me." That line caught me off guard. For years, I'd imagined hearing him say sorry. I thought it would make me feel vindicated. Instead, it just felt sad. "Dad," I said quietly, "I didn't need to prove anything to you. I just needed to prove that I could be someone, even without your approval." He nodded, eyes glistening. "You did more than that. You became everything I wasn't brave enough to be." Then he leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I'm sick, Daniel. The stress, the years of work, it's taken a toll." My heart skipped. "Sick? What do you mean?" He hesitated before answering. "Heart failure. Doctor says I need treatment, maybe surgery. It's expensive." I didn't say anything. My chest felt heavy, but not from shock, from the cruel irony of it all. The man who once threw me out for being a failure was now sitting across from me, helpless and broken. "I'm not asking for your money," he added quickly, almost ashamed. "I just needed to tell you. I didn't want to leave this world without making things right with you." His voice cracked on the last word. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the man who raised me with more criticism than care. My mind flashed through every argument, every insult, every cold look. But I also remembered the few moments when he'd tried, the rare smiles, the quiet rides to school, the way he used to look proud before disappointment became his language. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "Not anymore. I did, for a long time, but I realized carrying that hate was only holding me back." He looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before: humility. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. The younger version of me would have shouted, "No." But the man sitting there now knew better. "I already did," I said quietly. Tears welled in his eyes, and he nodded slowly. "Thank you." We sat there for a long time, saying nothing more. For once, silence between us didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like peace. When I left that cafe, I didn't feel anger or pity. I felt closure. But as I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Daniel, please come to the hospital. It's about your father." I froze, staring at the screen. One conversation had healed years of pain. And now, fate was testing me again. The hospital room was quiet when I walked in, except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. My father lay there, pale and fragile, tubes and wires surrounding him. The strong, intimidating man I grew up fearing was gone. What lay before me was someone else, someone smaller, softer, human. My mother sat beside him, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw me, she stood up immediately. "Daniel, thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, unable to find my words. The last time I'd been in a hospital was when I was 12, after my father worked himself sick chasing another business deal. Back then, I sat outside the ICU and promised myself I'd make him proud one day. Now here we were again, only this time, the promise had already been fulfilled. Just not the way I once imagined. I approached his bedside slowly. His eyes fluttered open, and when he saw me, he tried to sit up. "Hey," I said softly, resting my hand on his arm. "Don't move too much." He smiled faintly. "You came." "Of course I did," I replied. He looked weak, but peaceful. "They say I might need surgery soon," he murmured. "It's risky, though." My mother squeezed his hand, trying to be strong but barely holding it together. "The doctors are hopeful," she said, her voice trembling. He turned to me. "I don't want you to worry about any of this, Daniel. I just needed to see you again, to tell you how proud I am of what you've become." That word, proud, it hit me like a wave. I'd waited my entire life to hear it, and now, in this small, sterile room, filled with fading light, it finally came. "I never thought I'd hear you say that," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd deserve to." I sat there in silence, just watching him breathe. Every memory, every wound, every tear, every argument flashed through my mind, and suddenly, none of it mattered anymore. Because the man who once broke me was the same man who had unknowingly built my resilience. We talked for hours that evening, about life, about regrets, about time lost. He asked me about my company, the places I'd traveled, the people I'd met. He listened, really listened, for the first time in my life. When visiting hours ended, he reached for my hand. "Daniel," he said weakly, "promise me something. Anything. Don't let anger define you. It nearly destroyed me. Don't let it touch you the way it touched me." I nodded, holding back tears. "I won't." He smiled faintly, then whispered, "I'm proud of you, son." That was the last thing he said to me before he fell asleep. I left the hospital that night with a storm of emotions inside me. Forgiveness, sadness, gratitude, relief. It was as if years of pain had finally loosened their grip. But just when I thought the past had been put to rest, life wasn't done teaching me lessons. The next morning I got a call from my mother. Her voice was breaking. "Daniel, it's your father." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What happened?" He didn't make it through the night." Silence. Cold, unbearable silence. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, my world suddenly still. All the words I'd held onto for years, the anger, the hurt, the need for closure, they vanished. I drove straight to the hospital. When I arrived, the room was quiet, his bed already empty. My mother was sitting by the window, her face pale and distant. "He went peacefully," she whispered. "He wasn't in pain." I sat beside her, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The man who had been the source of my greatest pain was gone. But strangely, so was the weight I had carried for years. At his funeral a few days later, I stood in front of his photo. Everyone around me whispered about his legacy, his downfall, his mistakes. But I didn't care about any of that. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and said, "My father wasn't perfect. He was tough, proud, and sometimes cruel. But he taught me something I'll never forget. That failure isn't the end, unless you accept it. He made me stronger, even when he didn't mean to. And because of him, I learned to rise." People clapped softly. My mother cried quietly beside me. After the ceremony, I walked out alone and looked up at the sky. The wind was cool, the world quiet. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. But peace doesn't mean the story was over, because what happened next, after the funeral, was something I never expected. My mother called me a week later, her tone calm but serious. "Daniel," she said, "your father left something for you in his will, and you'll want to see it in person." I had no idea then that what he left behind would change everything I thought I knew about him. A week later, I found myself sitting in the same law office where my father had signed all his contracts years ago, the place that once represented power, control, and everything I thought I'd never have. Now I was there for something else: closure. The lawyer, an older man named Harris, adjusted his glasses and gave me a polite nod as I entered. "Mr. Collins," he said softly, "please, have a seat. Your mother will be here shortly." I sat down, looking around the room. The walls were lined with photos, my father shaking hands with business partners, smiling with politicians, posing in front of buildings that no longer bore his name. Every image was a reminder of how far he had fallen, and how far I had come. When my mother arrived, she looked tired but calm. She sat beside me, her hands trembling slightly. Harris opened a brown folder, took a deep breath, and began to read. "Your father left a personal note, to be read to you before the distribution of his assets." He handed me a sealed envelope. My name, Daniel, was written across it in his handwriting. My throat tightened as I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in uneven lines. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I've gone somewhere you can't follow. Not yet. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm grateful you gave it anyway. You became the man I never managed to be, brave enough to walk your own path. You were right to leave. I was wrong to stop you. I built a life on fear. Fear of failure, fear of losing control. But you built yours on faith, and that's why you succeeded. There's something I left behind, something I never told you about. A small property, not much, but it's yours. Not as payment, but as a symbol of what I should have given you long ago. Trust. Take it. Make it something meaningful." "Dad," I just sat there holding the letter, my hand shaking slightly. I had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. Anger, tears, disbelief. But not this. Not peace. "Daniel," my mother said softly, watching me. I folded the letter carefully and took a deep breath. "What property is he talking about?" Harris flipped through the documents. "A cabin near the old lake house. It's been untouched for years. Your father bought it quietly after he retired. He said it was meant to be your space, when you were ready." My heart sank. The lake house. That was where we used to spend summers when I was a kid, before everything went wrong. I remembered fishing with him on foggy mornings, his rare smiles, the quiet moments when he wasn't so hard on me. Maybe that's why he chose it. Maybe he wanted to leave a memory behind. Not of the man who yelled, but of the father who tried. 2 days later, I drove out there. The road was long and empty, cutting through miles of pine forest. When I reached the cabin, it looked old but sturdy. The wood was weathered, the windows dusty, but it felt alive, like it had been waiting. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of old books and cedar. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the floor with golden light. On a small table near the window sat a box. Plain, wooden, and sealed with my initials carved into the lid. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, I found a few photos. Me as a child, my father holding me at the park, our family smiling before life hardened him. Beneath them was a small flash drive. labeled in his handwriting. For Daniel. I took out my laptop, plugged it in, and watched the screen flicker to life. It was a video. My father sat in that same cabin, recorded just months before he died. His voice was tired but steady. If you're watching this, son, it means I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want you to know something. I did love you. I just didn't know how to show it. I thought being hard on you would make you strong. I didn't realize I was breaking the very thing I wanted to build. He paused, breathing deeply. You became everything I wanted to be, Daniel. Independent, unafraid. You didn't follow my path. You made your own. That's what I should have taught you all along. For a moment he just looked into the camera, his eyes glassy. Use this place, son. Make it yours. Let it be a reminder that the past doesn't define us. What we choose next does. I'm proud of you. The screen faded to black. I sat there for a long time, the sound of wind whispering through the trees outside. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a failure. I didn't feel like the rejected son or the boy who needed to prove himself. I just felt whole. When I stepped outside, the sky was painted with soft orange light. I stood there, looking out over the lake, and whispered, I forgive you, Dad. The wind blew gently through the pines, as if carrying my words away. In that moment, I realized something. Success wasn't the revenge, peace was. But the story didn't end there, because that cabin, the one he left me, held one more secret, a secret that would change how I saw him forever. The next morning, I returned to the cabin with a strange feeling in my chest. Peace? Yes, but also curiosity. There was something about my father's final message, the way he said, there's something I left behind, that didn't sit right with me. I walked through the small cabin slowly, taking in every detail. The wooden floors creaked under my steps, and the smell of dust and pine filled the air. Everything looked untouched, frozen in time. There was an old desk in the corner. Its surface was covered in papers, most yellowed with age. I started going through them. Some were old property deeds, others handwritten notes. But one stood out. It was a folder labeled Collins Development Project, Confidential. Inside were blueprints, contracts, and financial statements, all dated years after his business supposedly went bankrupt. My brow furrowed. According to these documents, my father had secretly been working on something even after he lost everything. And then I found it. A letter addressed to me. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you found what I couldn't finish. This isn't about money. It's about redemption. After I pushed you away, I realized my biggest failure wasn't losing the company. It was losing my family. So, I started this project, a housing foundation meant for families who lost everything, like we once did. I wanted to build something that gave others a second chance. But my health got worse, and I couldn't see it through. I registered the project under your name, Collins Foundation. The documents are in the safe beneath the floorboards. If you want to continue it, it's yours. If not, let it go. But either way, know this. I always believed you'd do something great, even when I was too proud to admit it. Dad, my heart started racing. I pushed the chair aside and knelt down. Sure enough, there was a metal plate in the floor. I pried it open and found a small safe inside. The code was easy to guess. My birthday. Inside were stacks of papers, legal files, and a small black notebook. When I opened it, I saw detailed sketches and ideas. Homes, community centers, schools. It was like he'd been quietly trying to make up for his past by helping others rebuild their lives. And he wanted me to finish it. I sat back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. For so long I thought he only cared about wealth, power, reputation. But here, in this dusty cabin, I realized the truth. He had been trying to change, to do something meaningful. Tears welled in my eyes. You old fool, I whispered, smiling through the ache. You never gave up, did you? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going through his notes, page by page. He'd planned everything meticulously, from budget outlines to designs for affordable housing. He had even written a mission statement, To give people a new start when the world calls them failures. Those words hit me harder than anything else, because that was me once, and now I had the chance to turn his redemption into reality. The next morning I called my lawyer. "I need to reopen a project," I said. "What kind of project?" he asked. "One that changes lives." Within weeks, I assembled a small team: architects, engineers, and community workers. Using part of my company's resources, I revived the Collins Foundation. At the launch event 6 months later, I stood on a small stage looking out at the crowd. My mother was in the front row, tears in her eyes. Behind her were families who had lost their homes, their jobs, people who needed hope. I took a deep breath and began speaking. My father once told me I'd never make it on my own. For years I believed him. But what I didn't realize was that his words weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning. He taught me what not to be. And through that, he gave me the strength to become who I am today. This foundation isn't just about rebuilding homes. It's about rebuilding people, the ones the world calls failures, the ones who just need someone to believe in them. When I finished, the crowd applauded. My mother stood and hugged me tightly, whispering, "He'd be so proud of you." I smiled. I think, finally, I'm proud of him too. After the event, I drove back to the cabin one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold and red. I sat by the lake, watching the ripples move across the water. For the first time, there was no anger in my heart, no resentment, just gratitude for the pain, the lessons, and the man who, in his own flawed way, made me who I was. I whispered into the quiet air, "We did it, Dad." A gentle wind rustled through the trees as if he was answering back. I smiled, stood up, and walked toward my car. I wasn't the broken son anymore. I wasn't the boy who needed approval. I was the man who turned his pain into purpose and proved that, sometimes, the best revenge is redemption.